What's up guys, welcome back to another video, and today I'm going to be showing you how to prepare your beats to sell online. Welcome back guys. First and foremost, I want to apologize real quick if I sound a little weird. I woke up this morning and my allergies were not having it. Anyway, this video is going to be part 2 of last week's video where I talked about the truth, if you will, of beat mixing and mastering. So if you haven't checked that out, definitely watch it first. But this week I promised you guys that I would take one of my own beats and walk you step by step as to what I do to prepare and export my beat to upload to the internet and potentially sell online. Now for this video and demonstration, I'm going to be using the Halsey type beat, which was the beat that I made in my last Beat Making Monday episode, but let's jump right in. Okay, so jumping into Studio One, we are now in the production session for that Halsey type beat, which was actually called Reconcile. Now before we even get into anything mixing, I want to show you guys how I export my wave trackouts. Now I've talked about this before, but I split my production and mixing sessions into 2. That's just kind of how my brain works. But what I tend to do a lot as I'm producing is I do a very rough volume or leveling mix just to kind of hear what the beat would sound like. But at the end, I take everything off, I level everything back up to 0, and then I print my wave trackouts then. Now, very small disclaimer, everything that I'm going to tell you is very general, so it should apply to every DAW. However, the keyboard shortcuts will be for Mac and Studio One only, so there's that. But jumping into the production session real quick, you're gonna see here that the beat is fully arranged and there's a bunch of different patterns here, much like you would see like in FL Studio. So the first thing that I'm gonna do is I'm gonna click anywhere here on the screen, then hit Command A. That's gonna highlight everything. Then I'm gonna hit the G key, which consolidates all those patterns for that sound into one big file. Now, the reason you wanna do this is because if I were to just export at this stage, every single pattern would be a WAV file, and you don't want that because it's no good. So what you do again is hit Command A, hit the G key, and it consolidates everything. Then what you wanna do is you wanna go ahead and grab the ends and kind of, match everything up. Make sure everything is good to go. Make sure like these here, they also match up at the end. And it looks like, let's do that real quick here. So there we go. And then make sure you do that. Now, a quick pro tip here, I usually don't leave my, like the end of my files right where the song would end, because what happens a lot of times is a lot of VSTs have built-in reverbs and delays. So if I were to print my stems here, even if there was like a tail for a delay or a reverb, this would cut abruptly and you don't want that. So what I usually do is I extend everything maybe like 1 or 2 bars, just so I have that control and I have that tail that I can then manipulate in the mixing session. But essentially, once this looks more so like this, just kind of consolidated, and let's hide track 8 because it has nothing. So once it looks like this, the next thing I do is I go to my mixing board here and I make sure that everything is up at 0. And the way to do this quickly is I'm holding the Command key and just clicking on the fader, and it sends it back to 0. If I had any plugins, I usually would take them off with the global on and off effect button. I usually don't, but if I do, I take them off. Very few cases I might actually print the sound with the effect. It just depends really. But essentially what I will do from here is I'm going to hit Command A and then hit Command B. That will bounce all of my files and turn them into WAV files, and then actually put them in its own little folder called bounces. So let's do that now. Okay, so as you can see, it automatically turned all of my MIDI files into WAV files, and then what actually also happened is it deposited everything into a folder called bounces. Now if I click on that, you're gonna see all your wave trackouts from that beat, and usually what I do at this point is I just go ahead and I rename it to like original stems or something like that. So that in essence is going to be your wave trackouts. The only other thing that I would do at this point is maybe zip it or compress it. That way it's just takes up less space whenever you're uploading it to wherever. Okay, now that we have the wave trackouts, I'm gonna show you guys how to print out the MP3 file and the wave file that you're gonna license, and then your mastered showcase file. Okay, so now we're in the mixing session for this beat, and obviously this is already mixed, but you know, just bear with me. So what we're gonna do is we're gonna assume that you're at the point where you've leveled your beat, you've added your plugins, your reverbs, your delays, your EQs and compressors and all that, and the beat is sounding good. That is where we're gonna start. Now, if you take a look at my mixing board here real quick, I want you to look at the bottom right-hand side. Now, I've told you guys how I like to work in buses. So if you take a look, I have an instrument bus where all my instruments are routed to. I have a drums bus where all my drums are routed to. But then I have two other buses, a Submix and a mix bus. Now, the reason for this is because I don't put anything on my master bus. I don't touch that bus at all. Now, a couple years back, I read an article that said that the engineer that was writing it, that he didn't touch his master bus. And I don't remember the reason why. I don't even remember the article, but ever since I read that, I just really don't touch my master bus at all. And I'm sure there's a pretty good scientific explanation reason as to why he said what he said. But ever since then, what I do instead is I create this mix bus where I put all of the plugins that are going to affect the record as a whole. Now, you can use this during the mixing session, maybe to put like a compressor that would kind of glue the entire track all together. Or conversely, you could also use it like I'm using it now, where I put my limiters to create my showcase mastered version of the beat. So that in essence is what I use the mix bus for. Now, the Submix, the only reason that I have, or that I've created this bus, is to make sure that my levels of my mix are peaking where I want it to make sure that I have enough headroom for the MP3 and WAV files that I'm gonna export in a minute. So if you think about it, the only purpose for this bus here is to show me the levels of my mix before they hit my limiters. And again, this is just to make sure that I have enough headroom in my mix. Now, I've talked about this before as well, but I tend to leave my mixes at -6 dB. I found that this is a sweet spot for me. A lot of people will go a lot higher to -3, some go a lot lower to -10 or -12. What I would recommend is start at -6, see how you like it, but ultimately I encourage you to experiment and see what you like, but at the end of the day, just make sure you leave some headroom. So I want you guys to look real quick at these two buses real quick, pay attention to those. I'm gonna play the track. I'm not going to actually play it. I'm gonna mute it because if I were to play it with the limiters, it would just blow your ears out. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna activate all this, but I'm gonna mute it. But I want you guys to take a look at the levels of the Submix and the mix bus. You're gonna notice that the Submix is going to peak around -6, and the mix bus is gonna be closer to 0 because remember, these are the levels of my mix before they hit my limiter, and this is going to be the levels of my mix after the limiter. So take a look. So again, as you guys just saw, my Submix was telling me that my mix before it hit the limiters was peaking at around -6, which means that whenever I license this to an artist and they buy this beat and they give it to their engineer, they are going to have enough headroom to record their vocals. Now, to create this little Submix reference bus, it's super simple if your DAW has the ability to create buses. So this here again contains all my melodic instruments, this contains all my drums, and then what I do from here is I select this and select this at the same time with the shift key, right click, and then go to add bus for selected channels. That is effectively going to create your Submix. Then I take this, I right click and hit add bus for selected channels again. That is going to create your mix bus, and it's that easy. Now, last but not least, to get your Submix to peak at -6, all you really do is take all of your faders here and bring them all down at the same time until your peaks start to average at about -6 dB on your Submix. Now, an easy way to do this if you're in Studio One is to create these VCA faders, and essentially all they do is they control the volume of multiple faders all at once. So if you take a look there, that's what happens. And the way to do that is you're gonna go ahead and select the channels that you want. So this is all my melodic instruments. You right click and then you hit add VCA for selected channels. And I'm gonna do that again. So you see it creates another one, and then you're able to manipulate all of those at once. So essentially, to make it easy, then you would just select both of these, You have one for drums and for, instruments, and then just bring those down until your submix starts to peak at around -6. So now at this point, you've done everything you need to do to make sure that your mix sounds good and that it has enough headroom. So now from here, what we're gonna do is, pretend this is not here yet. We don't have any mastering anything on it yet. This is just a mixed beat peaking at -6. So what we're gonna do is I like to open up this little flag button up here, top left corner, which brings out the start and end markers for your song. I go ahead and I place it where I want to or where I see appropriate. Then what we're gonna do is we're going to hit Command E, and that is going to bring out the export mixdown panel. Go ahead and name it whatever you want. Mine was called reconcile, and I usually label it as _mixed. That's not how you spell mixed. Mixed. Then I'm gonna go ahead and select between song start and end marker. Alternatively, you could also use the looping tool and hit between loop, but I find this is a lot easier for me. Then you're going to leave this how it is. Under format, you're going to select MP3 at 320 kilobytes per second. You're going to hit up here where it has the 3 dots, select where you want to export, hit open, and then hit OK. Now this will effectively export your MP3 version of the beat. Then you're gonna come back here, do the exact same thing again, but this time you're going to switch this from MP3 file to WAV file, and you're gonna switch the resolution from 16 to 24. You can do 32-bit float, but I tend to just stick to 24. That's just my preference. But again, select where you want it, hit OK, and that will export your WAV file for your beat. So at this point now we have the WAV track outs, we have the MP3 version of your beat, we have the WAV version of your beat, and all we need now is that loud mastered showcase version so you can upload to wherever. So to do that, we're gonna go back to the mixing board here, and we're gonna utilize this mixing bus. All right, so diving into my mastering chain, the first plugin that I use is Ozone 6 by Isotope. Now I know they have like a version like 7 or 8 or something like that, but if it's not broke. But what I do here is I go to the bottom section where it says browse, and I select under balanced, I select CD master. And this is the presets that you get. You get an EQ, you get a compressor, and you get a limiter. Now, personally, I do not mess with these two. I leave them how they are. You can mess with them if you want to, but I typically don't. And then the only other thing that I add is I add in an imager, and I add that right before the limiter. And on here, I click this little box again, and I add the modern with preset. Now in the actual limiter itself, what I do is I come over here, and quite honestly, I don't know what the heck these things do. If you do know, let me know, but I usually just leave it at IRC1 by default. What I do mess with though are the ceiling and the threshold. Now the ceiling pretty much tells the program where to limit, where to stop. So if your ceiling is at -0.1 dB, your the peak levels will not go past that. I like to be a little bit more conservative, so I bring this down to about -1 dB. And then the threshold, you're gonna bring this down. This is actually what's gonna make your beat louder. So I bring this down until I start to see some gain reduction. So what I'm gonna do now is I'm gonna play the track. Well, not actually play it, because again, if I were to play with the limiters, I would blow your ears out. But what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna play it and kind of bring this down until I start to see some gain reduction, and we'll kind of go through it together. So let me go ahead and mute the track, engage this plugin, and let's go ahead and do it. So we're gonna pull this down a bit until we start to see a little bit of gain reduction. Oh, it's too much. Let's go back up. Right around like -6. Now from here, what I like to do is I go ahead and I add another limiter. I add an L1 from Waves, and you guys can go ahead and copy my settings here. I usually, again, leave a -1 dB on the ceiling, and the threshold, I have it about -5 dB. Now, if you're wondering why I'm using 2 limiters instead of 1, I wanna say about 3-4 years ago, I read another article that kind of mentioned that using 2 limiters to divvy up the workload was a lot more efficient, and it sounded better than to just have 1 limiter and make it do all the work by itself. Now, I can't pull up some numbers or graphs to prove this theory to you, but what I can tell you is that over the years of using this method, I found, at least in my opinion, that this gets me a little bit closer to the effect that I'm looking for, which is to have a nice loud beat without over limiting or over compressing. But anyway, again, I use the L1 from Waves as my second limiter. You can go ahead and copy those settings if you'd like. A good thing to point here is that you don't need to use these plugins if you don't have them. You are more than welcome to use the stock plugins from Studio One or from whatever DAW you have. I am 100% certain that they will do the exact same thing. But essentially at this point, you have a loud, mastered, showcase version of your beat through your mastering chain here. So what you need to do now is go ahead and just add your tags wherever you feel appropriate, then hit Command E. We're gonna go ahead and name this beat again, and now I'm gonna call this the mastered version underscore with tags. So I'm gonna go ahead and I usually export this in a WAV file 24-bit, select where you want it, between song start and end marker, and then hit OK. But that, guys, essentially is how you create all the files that you need to upload and license your beats on the internet. So kind of in conclusion, we created the wave track outs, which are raw with no effects. We created the MP3 and WAV file, which have a -6 dB of headroom, which is gonna make the engineer of the artist who purchases your beats very, very happy. And then you have a loud version which peaks at -1, which you're going to use to showcase your beat and hopefully get it sold. But again, thank you so much for watching, guys. If you found this video useful, give it a thumbs up, subscribe if you're not already, but I will see you guys on the next one.